And good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre and House here on a Friday. How's everybody doing here this morning on this 17th day of October? Hopefully, you guys doing well. We have reached the weekend yet again, and we are burning through the month here. Just about, a little over halfway through, I suppose. About, 10 weeks or so left of 2025, and we're off to the new year. And looking outside the old window here this morning, looks like sun is indeed shining in my neck of the woods here. Trees starting to change colors a little bit here in my area here, and certainly seeing some of the leaves in that falling for sure. Fall time and that upon us here. How's everybody doing here this morning? Hopefully you got your coffee in hand, your beverage choice, all that good stuff in tow here this morning. We do have a few things to get to on the broadcast here on this Friday edition of In Case You Missed News. And do appreciate you guys tuning in wherever you may be tuning in from here this morning. If you're hanging out over on the Beam Stream side here this morning, good to see you. If you're hanging out over on the Foxhole side here this morning, good to have you guys aboard. If you're hanging out over on Rumble, tuning in over on Kick, over on DLive, and of course now over on the YouTube side this morning as we just flipped it on here for a little bit. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And that being said, let's take a look, see what all we got in store here for the morning. This morning, we'll get into a couple things. We'll talk about on the verge of a funding crisis. Fed's emergency liquidity facility soars the most since COVID. We'll get into that here in just a bit. Also, talk a little bit about $300 trillion fat finger. How does that happen? We'll get into that here on the crypto side of things. Also, when do we truly own anything? The property tax scheme that keeps you paying forever. We'll get into that here in just a bit as well. Also talk about e-waste is a literal gold mine. Of course, likely talking about a lot of the materials in that, especially when it comes to solar panels. How do you extract all that stuff out on the back end? Not too much by way of a recycling program in regards to all that e-waste, as they call it. We'll get into Royal Mint warns of delivery delays as Londoners rush for silver. Of course, we know silver and that has been on the rise, as has gold here as of late. Of course, you can see the prices in that here, spot prices in that here as of this morning here, hitting some new all-time highs in that in the overnight hours. World is changing. Nestle shares surged most since 2008 after announcing plans to cut jobs. We briefly touched upon that here in the rundown here yesterday morning. Also get into Europe in the rare earth trap. Up to 4 million German jobs are at risk as Beijing tightens their noose around the EU. We'll get into that here in just a bit as well. So it's not just rare earths in that here stateside, but also across Europe as well. And then from there, rare earth miners stock slammed after U.S. Defense Department cancels cobalt purchase. We'll get into that here in just a bit. Also, 13 reasons why gold has outperformed stocks since 2000. We'll get into that. Also get into regional banks crash as more credit cockroaches emerge. There we go. Spit it out. This, of course, on the heels of the tricolor and the subprime stuff that we've been kind of tracking with here as of late. And also, from there, we'll get into more than an accident. Calabas sounds alarm on U.S. military explosion in regards to the supply chain after the Tennessee explosion that occurred last week. We'll get into that here. And U.S. report suggests the biggest ever budget surplus for the month of September, thanks to record tariffs. We'll get into the outlays and so forth and that, receipts, outlays, all that good stuff here and where things reside. And from there, America first. Hegseth announces Qatar to build Air Force facility in U.S. heartland. We'll back up to a piece net out here late last week. And also tie that into this piece. Peter Schweitzer, Mamdani family is joined at the hip with foreign powers. Radical powers at that, by the way. You'll see the connection here, and it's going to be pretty obvious here and give you pause. So we'll get into that here toward the back end of the show here this morning. Again, do appreciate you guys tuning in wherever you're tuning in from here this morning. And also, we got the noties net out over on the Twitter side, over on the True Social, as well as over on the Gab side for those not joining. If you could pass those along, retweet it, and I'll repost, all that good stuff. Certainly appreciate it. That being said, we'll take a look at the weather here this morning, see what's doing across the country, and it looks like for the folks net out to the west, by way of radar here this morning, not much doing at all. A little scatter net maybe coming across top end of Montana here this morning, maybe a little bit up around the Canadian border, north of North Dakota there. A little scatter net coming across Minnesota. And maybe a little bit down across Oklahoma and Arkansas here this morning. Otherwise, looks like Michigan. May see a little bit here this morning. Otherwise, everybody else net up and down the eastern seaboard and down across southeast. Looking pretty good here this morning. And it looks like down on the waters off the Pacific side, over off of Mexico, we still got 91E hanging out down here. Still an unnamed storm. Apparently hasn't collected itself enough to become a named storm here as of yet. So 91E projected path net over the next 24, 48 hours. And don't think there's anything else stretching all the way out to Hawaii that we see here. But over on the Atlantic side, some storm activity at net out there. See some juiced up skies, but no signs of any spinners net on the water over on the Atlantic side here, at least on this Friday. So just 91E hanging out there at the moment. And by way of precipitation this morning, looks like folks net across Washington State and across Canada. Looks like maybe picking up a little bit of trace rain and that here this morning. Folks net off to the east of that, though, it looks like maybe a little bit of fog and that if you're across the southeastern portions of Idaho, maybe down around Wyoming and into Utah, down in those three corners there. Coming across top end of the country in North Dakota, maybe see a little bit of rain and that across top end of North Dakota here this morning. Folks net across Minnesota and down into Iowa. Looks like a little line of showers net passing through there, just a little bit of trace rain through those parts and some high pressure net across the east and up the eastern seaboard net here on your Friday. Would probably imagine we'll be seeing quite a bit of sun and that for the folks there. Up into Michigan, looks like maybe a little bit of trace rain coming through those parts here this morning as well. Other than that, everybody else net looking pretty good here to start your Friday. And temperature-wise, folks net down in Florida coming in right around the 80-degree mark in that here this morning. 80s and mid-70s net across much of the state. Georgia in the 70s. Looks like by the time you push your way up the eastern seaboard there across the Carolinas into Virginia, it looks like it's tail off into the 50s net here this morning. Folks net on up into Maryland, up around New Jersey, Delaware, up through that corridor in the 50s as well. It looks like Pennsylvania in the low 50s net east side of the state. Folks net up into Connecticut, Massachusetts, and on up into New England here this morning in the 40s and 50s both. 40s now to a little bit more toward the Canadian border here this morning, and by the time you work your way back down toward New York, northern parts of the state in the 40s, and back to the west, right around the 50-degree mark in that here to start your morning. Pennsylvania in the 50s net across much of the state, and looks like West Virginia in the mid to upper 50s net through there. By the time you work your way back down toward the Gulf of America here this morning, looks like again upper 70s, low 80s net across Florida, Alabama, into Mississippi, and over into Louisiana. Looks like you're into the mid-70s net here to start your morning. Houston area, down around Texas in the mid-upper 70s. And by the time you work your way down toward the southern part of Texas, you're going to be in the low 80s net here this morning. Northern parts of the state, though, in the 50s and 60s, so about a 20-degree swing top to bottom there. Oklahoma, Kansas in the 60s, and by the time you work your way back up toward the Dakotas and up around the Canadian border, you're going to be right around the 40-degree mark net here this morning, mid to upper 40s. Folks net across much of Minnesota in the 50s and 60s net more toward the south. Wisconsin in the 60s net here this morning as well, across much of the state. Back to the west, though, across the western portions of the Dakotas and east side of Montana, you're in the 40s net here this morning. Some areas net in the blue in the 30s net out in those western states, and some 20s net mixed in, likely in some of the elevations there, over into the northwest portions of Wyoming here this morning. Some 30s and 40s net in the mix. Folks are net over into Idaho in the 40s net. Definitely see some 30s net more toward the east side of the state. Washington State in the 40s net here, more across much of the east side of the state, and more toward the 50s net along the coast. Looks to be the case net for folks net down across Oregon as well here this morning. 50s along the coast, 40s net back toward the east. Across top end of California here this morning. Some 40s and 50s net along the coast, and by the time you get down toward the southern part of Cali here this morning, you're going to be in the 60-degree range. Folks net down in the southern and western portions of Arizona, down in those desert parts net here this morning, also in the mid-upper 50s net here on the start of your Friday. New Mexico, 30s net up toward the northwest portion of the state, and 60s net by the time you work your way back down toward the southeastern portion of the state. So a good 30-degree swing in that top to bottom of New Mexico here on the morning. And it looks like by way of cloud cover net here this morning on this Friday. High broken clouds net across much of the western states and periods of sun and clouds both across much of the west and upper plains. Into the Dakotas net, you'll see quite a bit of cloud cover net through there, so be in and out of there as well. Folks net down to the southwest should see some fairly sunny skies. A net on your Friday. Texas net, a mix of sun and clouds. And it looks like for those of us in the Midwest, and pushing east of the Mississippi, it looks like it'll be under clouds and sun both here. As mentioned, I do see some sunshine and at my neck of the woods here, but definitely can see some clouds and that here coming up. Folks, net east of that, though, looks like cross southeast and pushing up the eastern seaboard. Up in New England, net here today looks like 10-20% cloud cover. Should see a good mix of sun and clouds net on the day as well. So there's a quick take a look at the old weather net here this morning, and by way of power outages net here this morning on the old maps. Let's give that a quick refresh here, and it looks like there we go. About 34,000 total customers across the country in net without power here this morning. No major ones net lit up on the old stoplight charts here this morning, but looks like Florida, Carolina's about 3,800 folks without power. Texas got about 3,100 or so in some select areas, but none due to any weather or anything along those lines causing any problems here on this Friday. And from there, over to the smoke and fire maps net we go here to start your morning. Looks like, again, folks net up in Canada still got plenty of fires net to contend with up in those parts. Some of those net north of, let's see, where are we at here? It looks like north of Vancouver. There we go. Still got plenty of fires net up in those parts. Some of those are kicking up a little bit of dense smoke, but largely staying to the north and not too much drift. We've still got plenty of fires net across the Pacific Northwest up in Washington State. Dozens of fires net across the state there. Over into Idaho, some of those are kicking up some smoke, so may see a little haze and smokiness in the air over in those parts, especially up north around the border and that where we got about a dozen and a half fires up around the Canadian border in Washington State there. Folks net across Oregon, south of Portland area, got about half dozen, another 10 to 2 fires net across there. And folks net over into California, north of Sacramento, got about 3-4 fires net over in those parts. Folks net down around Fresno got about a dozen and a half, another couple, 2, 3, 4 or so down around LA, and probably another 5 or so down south part of Cali here this morning. None of which appear to be kicking up a major amount of smoke. However, over on the east side of the country, looks like if you're down in Florida, coming across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, over to Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, and through that corridor, as we've seen in weeks and months past, still got plenty of fires net in those parts. Georgia got about 90-some fires through there, another 40 in that there, 60 in that back toward Alabama, another 140 in that back toward Arkansas and Missouri border down through that corridor. It's got all sorts of fires net lit up in those parts and producing a little bit of smoke and haze. May see some poor air quality in some of those respective areas net here to start your Friday. And with that being said, over to the markets net we go here this morning, and that is where we'll cut off with the YouTube folks net here this morning. I do appreciate you guys tuning in here this morning. If you're over on the YouTube side, I would encourage you to jump over to the rest of the platforms you can find in the description net here this morning. Jump over to Rumble, over to DLive, over to Kick, over to Foxhole, wherever you may be, and we'll see you there here.